get screwy that. Oh.
Everybody, thank you for joining us for this month's conversation with Dr. Alan Dieterich-Ward, who is the author of The Cradle of Conservation. Welcome, Alan. Thank you for being here.
Marcy, I am so excited to be here, particularly for this month. I know how passionate friends of PA Parks and Forest Foundation are about trails of all kinds, hiking trails, long distance trails, short distance trails. I'm super excited. You see, in honor of it, I wore my Appalachian.
Oh, beautiful.
Sure. Mm-hmm. So, yep. So I'm super excited, and I also know this is something you're particularly excited and passionate about. So I'm looking forward to a great conversation.
Am I? Because it is National Trails Month, and so this was the perfect month to have this conversation about the history of trails in Pennsylvania. So, what do you have for us this month, Alan?
Well, if you'll pull up my slideshow,
I sure will.
I'll walk you through it. So, as always, and a reminder to folks who are watching, everything we're doing here is connected to this bigger overall of Pennsylvania's conservation heritage. If you take a look at PennsylvaniaConservationHeritage.org, PAConservationHeritage.org, you're going to see all kinds of connections, oral histories, biographies of key people. I'll point to a couple of them as we're going through the project, and of course the series of documentaries that we produced in collaboration with WITF. So there's lots of great stuff. So for further information, check out PAConservationHeritage.org, and of course, all connecting to the book, right? Cradle of Conservation, my book that's available to everyone. Now, I have a confession to make, Marcy. I know it's not that kind of confession, right? I don't need a priest, but I talk about trails some in Cradle of Conservation, potentially when we get into Rails to Trails later on in the book, but I didn't talk an extensive amount about trails, as important as they are to Pennsylvania, because and your good friend, Silas Chamberlain, a good friend of the Parks and Forest Foundation, has an award-winning, absolutely amazing book called On the Trail, A History of American Hiking, which comes out of his master's and dissertation work. And it's, I think I could say this truthfully, there's a lot of Pennsylvania in this book because of Pennsylvania's importance to hiking. So I am shamelessly and very publicly stealing from Silas Chamberlain in today's talk. And if Silas is on the line, hopefully I don't get anything wrong, Silas. I know that you will correct me if I do. So,
and if we're going to shamelessly plug, I might also add that this book, along with your book, are available on the Pennsylvania Parks and Forest Foundation's website under the store.
They sure are. And you can get these books a lot of different places, but there's only one place you can get them in which your purchase directly supports your favorite park, state park or state forest. The money goes to the Parks and Forest Foundation. Yep. So Take a look at PAConservationHeritage.org or the Parks and Forest Foundation website. Okay. Oh, and I think too, on that too, there's a lovely excerpt from the book in which Silas talks about the importance of the history of hiking and connects it to today. There's a PDF version of last spring's newsletter, or the spring before's newsletter, in which Silas
this year he did a piece on that, and we also have a book review on our blog about the book. And I do want to remind people, if they have a question for you as you're presenting, they can put it into the chat on whatever platform they're watching this, and I'll be monitoring that and make sure that you get that question at the end.
And if I don't know the answer, then I will just pretend like I've gone temporarily deaf. So it'll be good. It'll be good. Okay. So just to kind of start, of course, you can't talk about trails in Pennsylvania without talking about the history of transportation, which of course begins with the native peoples. First Pennsylvanians, and of course people who, the descendants of which are still here in Pennsylvania today. Many of the great kind of long distance trails in Pennsylvania are closely connected to this, trails system. I'm thinking, for example, of Warriors Path State Park, and I'll actually be at Warriors Path on Monday. My favorite stretch of the Juniata River to kayak. There's a great stretch that goes to Warriors Path, so I will be there following that water trail that connects in with the long distance trails that native peoples and then subsequently European colonists used to get around before the modern era. So we want to start with talking about native peoples. But when we think of recreational trails, right? When we think of recreational trails, which I think is what most people are thinking of today with trails, my sense is that we want to, in our minds, think about two different kinds of trail, right? One of them is wilderness trails, right? You can think of the Appalachian Trail, you can think of the Mid-State Trail. My favorite trail, that crazy badass cousin of the Appalachian Trail, the Tuscarora Trail. We think of those kind of wilderness trails, those kind of get away from it all kind of trails, right? And those types of trails were really, really important in the early 19th or mid 19th century evolution of what would become the conservation movement and the environmental movement, right? In the Adirondack Mountains, in the Poconos, you have these well-to-do Pennsylvanians, people that don't need to walk anymore, right? They have horses, they have trains, they have trolleys. But as urban areas grow and they sort of get farther away from that original need to kind of walk, people turn to those kind of trails to get away from it all, to reconnect with nature, right? We think of John Muir, right, who had his contemporaries in Pennsylvania, and the spiritual nature of kind of getting away from cities, that romantic trail, right? But there's this other kind of trail too that's kind of equally important, and that is trails that are about accessibility, right? If the wilderness trails are about sort of remoteness, right? Then the other kinds of trails that are equally important all the way through are those trails that get people from place to place, that are scenic, sure, right? But are not remote, right? They're close by. And so even as transportation systems evolved and developed, immediately there were people who used those kind of trails, not just for getting from place to place, but for recreation and leisure, for socializing, right? This is an example from the early 20th century of a group of walkers, right? You think of the promenade, right? Of folks kind of getting from place to place, not because they have to, but because they enjoy that healthy activity, that social activity of moving around. Does that make sense? Does that kind of jive with your two ways of thinking about trails?
Yeah, and it does. And I have read Silas's book, and it really stood out to me. It was that camaraderie of being with other people. It was that spiritual aspect, but they were also understanding some of the health benefits even then that we promote now as one of the reasons you want to spend time out in nature.
That's absolutely right. And I think, for example, of those two women in Philadelphia that really translated Joseph Rothrock's Michaud lectures into a political movement for public lands, Maria Cox and Mary Lundy. Mary Lundy and her husband, the Reverend Joseph Lundy, they would vacation in the Adirondacks and hike, right? And Joseph Lundy talked about the community aspects of that, as well as kind of the wilderness and the spiritual accesses of that, of kind of being connected to one another, right? So as we're thinking about then the evolution of these kind of two types of trails, right? The close in, the neighborhood, the connecting trails, the everyday trails, and we think about kind of the broader wilderness trails, Pennsylvania plays this incredibly important role in both of those kinds of trail development systems. As we see the development of parks in Philadelphia, in Pittsburgh, and elsewhere, walking and hiking, the health benefits of kind of those close to home parks were absolutely part of the progressive narrative. As urbanization happened and people got farther and farther away from the farm and agriculture, the need to have recreational activities that promoted good health and good citizenship and camaraderie. Those were really embedded in social movements in the progressive era, like the Parks and Playgrounds movement, the American civics movement that became really important to City Beautiful and Harrisburg, as well as in other cities and smaller towns like Carlisle. Okay, so Pennsylvania plays this important role in sort of imagining what local recreational trails will be through this period. But it also plays this really important role in long distance wilderness hiking. Now, we tend to think about this kind of long distance wilderness hiking as sort of coming out of New England and New York State, right? But it's not just there. You know, the Appalachian Mountain Club we think of, right? But it's not just in those areas. You know, by the early 1930s, we have more than a dozen, or even by the late 1920s, more than a dozen hiking groups in Pennsylvania. And one of the earliest sort of people who was promoting this long distance hiking is a guy named Henry Shoemaker. And we profile him. If you take a look at paconservation.org, we have this profile of Henry Shoemaker. He's this really, really interesting character. He's kind of this eccentric, comes into a big fortune and is this kind of eccentric guy from New York. Moves to Pennsylvania. He's really interested. He does a lot of kind of hiking, particularly in Western Pennsylvania to start out with, collects stories. He actually helps found the anthropology. He's really interested in telling native, the kind of collecting native people's stories, connecting myths, right? The Pennsylvania Folklore Society, he's a founder of it. Also joins the Forestry Commission, and he begins the Pennsylvania Alpine Club. He's one of a few that begin the Pennsylvania Alpine Club, which is the first of these statewide hiking clubs in Pennsylvania. There's the Blue Mountain Bald Eagle Club as well, and Shoemaker and his group are behind what becomes the Darlington Trail. And we talked about the spiritual nature and the health nature of these trails. Darlington Trail named after a bishop from Harrisburg. And this Darlington Trail, which still exists today, right, between Harrisburg and Carlisle, it becomes a portion of what later on becomes the Appalachian Trail. So one of the very first segments of what's going to become this kind of, thousands mile Appalachian Trail starts here in Pennsylvania.
Wonderful. Yeah. And there's the Darlington Shelter that also bears the name on the Appalachian Trail.
Yes, and it's right at that intersection between the Appalachian Trail. So Shoemaker's this interesting guy. He ends up getting a bit overshadowed. Some of his contemporaries, I believe the quote was, they did a lot more talking than they did trail building. And so it was left to others as we sort of make this transition into the mid-20th century and the development of this kind of great big trail in Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Trail. And of course, the Appalachian Trail is incredibly important in Pennsylvania. Myron Avery, who is becomes a director of the Appalachian Trail, and these newly formed trail clubs, particularly the Potomac Appalachian Trail Club, which is my local trail club, stitched together in the 1920s, stitched together this Appalachian Trail route from Maine down to Georgia, and including this section through Pennsylvania. Now, you've hiked a lot on the Appalachian Trail, I think, Marcy.
I have, and I'm a maintainer. A little plug for the Cumberland Valley Appalachian Trail Club.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about that. So I've maintained the AT a little bit as well, but I was a section maintainer out on the Tuscarora Trail. So tell me a little bit about like what aspects of being a club member and a maintainer really appeal to you.
Well, I think part of it is that it is such an iconic trail system. Mm-hmm. And, it's reliant on volunteers to keep it a positive experience. So we're doing things such as like maintaining the vegetation so it doesn't attack you as you're walking through, making sure water bars are clear the green tunnel. The green tunnel. Yeah, we're trying to make sure that you're not slogging through water so that you have a positive experience. But then we also get involved with, some trail magic,
Mm-hmm.
um, educating people about the trail. And, just yesterday, I think it was Channel 8 News did a story on the half-gallon challenge there at Pine Grove Furnace for people because the halfway mark is here in Pennsylvania. And,
Mm-hmm.
so there is a lot of, it's iconic, and there's a lot
Mm-hmm.
of things to get excited about, and just the stories, talking to people that are on it or doing it or have done it, either in sections or as a through hike. They have such amazing stories to share.
Absolutely, and I would be remiss. You mentioned Pine Grove Furnace, and of course, the Appalachian Trail Museum is right there in Pine Grove Furnace too.
Absolutely.
I think particularly in Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Trail sort of, to an extent, bridges this divide between the backyard trail and the wilderness trail. I think uniquely in Pennsylvania, the Appalachian Trail, because of just the nature of the geography, has to kind of come down out of the mountains and pass through farm fields and even subdivisions, and becomes this sort of way in which it's both an interstate and a back road here in Pennsylvania.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it
Know
literally
from
goes
reading
through
Silas's
towns.
book. It does, yeah. And you probably know from reading Silas's book or other great books on Sarah Midoved's book, Tangled Roots, tells this story too. But Pennsylvania created a big challenge in building the Appalachian Trail for exactly that reason. By the 1960s, the trail was getting more and more and more use, but there was this real fear. That the development of subdivision, the expansion of urban spaces, would make it so that kind of the handshake agreements that allowed the trail to exist in the past would break the trail, that there wouldn't be a way to get through the Cumberland Valley here in Pennsylvania. In fact, that's really the reason why the Tuscarora Trail was initially designed and built, coming from Shenandoah, up through the Cumberland Valley, to kind of provide this alternate, more wild route, because of these concerns about how to build what's essentially functionally a private trail network. What happens, of course, is that in the late 1960s, these long distance hiking trails get connected in with an expansion of federal power in 1968 through the National Scenic Trails Act. And you see the development of the Appalachian Trail as a national scenic trail, giving it the power and the resources of the federal government to make sure that by hook or by crook, that trail was going to be built. And of course, that creates controversy. We talked about last month, right? Where does the public good of public lands intersect with private property? And the Appalachian Trail kind of becomes an example of that so much of this can be done kind of privately, but ultimately, government resources are there to fill in, literally to fill in gaps in the case of the Appalachian Trail. So, and I think that's a good, Silas in his book kind of talks about this quite a bit of, where is that balance between sort of volunteers, private individuals supporting the things that they love and care about, with the recognition that these are in fact public goods, right? This is a public good, and sometimes requires public support for it to be able to be maintained. That's always that kind of dynamic that we talk about.
Yeah, and I think Silas does a really good job of outlining that, but also, we kind of moved away. Everything was done by volunteers up until the 60s and 70s, and then the volunteers were so successful in saying, hey, this should be part of a state system or a national system, that volunteerism kind of fell back. But as we were just talking about, all of these trails, whether it's the Appalachian Trail or the Donut Hole Trail or the 1 mile trail at your favorite park, they all rely on volunteers.
They do.
To keep them in a working, functional condition, so that when you go to this place, when you pull up to the trailhead, you know that you're going to have access to it, and that's critical.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right, Marcy. I mean, I have found that to be the case. I love Nels trails, of course. You don't need to hear me say that again, but I know that that's exactly the case. That you can see a difference between trails, regardless of what kind of support from local governments that they might have. You can see a difference between trails that that have an active, engaged volunteer, not just users. Users are great, but translating those users into folks who are willing to put their money and oftentimes, more importantly, their time and energy into maintaining those trails. You can see a big difference there.
You can.
I mean, the ones that have that and the ones that don't have that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm looking at her time, and you know me, getting me to talk about the problem. It's getting me to shut up. So let's go on to the last section. Now, we've been talking here primarily now for the last segment on these big wilderness trails, and of course, or sort of wild, back to nature kind of trails. And of course, the middle part of the century really enabled those kinds of trails, in part because of the expansion of the public land they build upon, right? So as we see the development of the state park system under Maurice Goddard, particularly from the 50s to the 70s, this provides more places, publicly owned places, that you can build and maintain trails on, right? And so we have some of our kind of great trails. I think you were just talking about the Laurel Highlands Trail had a big anniversary recently, right?
It's next year. It'll be 50 years old.
Yep. And so those kinds of trails become part of this, this state park public land system. But recently, there's, I think, been a shift back toward thinking about trails in your local community, right? And this, again, kind of has this broader shift about public lands. In the middle part of the 20th century, the real focus was on preserving big chunks of land that were away, that were relatively close, but a bit away from population centers. It was, a park within 25 miles of every Pennsylvanian. Well, every Pennsylvanian is not planning to walk those 25 to that park, so they depend on automobiles. Over the last couple of decades, we've had a shift back toward funding and supporting and thinking about trails that you can access from your back door, right? That you don't have to be able to drive to get to, because of course, those trails can then be connectors to other kinds of public lands, to your local parks, to county parks, whatever. And so I wanted to pick an example of that. Again, we're thinking about the significance of Pennsylvania in the development of trails and public lands. The first urban national wildlife refuge was developed here in Pennsylvania, right? It has this really, really important legacy. Tinicum Marsh, this kind of great inland urban wildlife refuge, swamp, right? Wetlands, right? That was just about drained for interstate highway development. There's this kind of big campaign to save the marsh, and there are lots of spillover, pun intended, from that campaign, which have national significance. Now, on the one hand, the development of Tinicum Marsh tells this big kind of national story of flyovers and of birds and and of the development of natural resources, but it's also a trail system in people's backyards, right? I mean, it is an easy walk from tens and tens of thousands of people living in South Philadelphia, and thus connects in with a local kind of walking trail system, much like that Delaware Canal picture that I showed you to get this started with.
And just to give people an orientation, if you've ever flown out of the Philadelphia airport, you have probably flown over like Tinicum Marsh, the John Hines National Wildlife Refuge.
That's right. That's right. So for me, then, this kind of brings us to where we are today, right? In which we have different kinds of trails serving different but equally important functions within our society. To get away from it all for a while and reconnect, but also to be able to reconnect and to connect, right, over your lunch break or with your grandkids in a stroller, right? This ability to have different kinds of trails, different kinds of trail systems within our overall public lands network plays this incredibly important role. And again, when we think about the conservation history, Pennsylvania plays a key role in the broader national and even international development of the ways we think about trails.
Yeah, and interestingly, for the state comprehensive outdoor recreation plan, they did a survey using the Lion poll of Pennsylvanians, and walking was the number one activity, followed not far behind by hiking and backpacking. And part of that is you don't necessarily need a lot of specialized equipment. Something on your feet, head out the door. You can be there potentially just heading out your door, like in the Johns Hines National Wildlife Refuge, or a short drive. The foundation is actively supporting Governor Shapiro's budget, which includes money for DCNR, but some additional funding that will help with bringing Glenanoco under the DCNR umbrella, which is an interesting hike that has been closed due to safety reasons.
No, and where is that hike?
That is on the Lehigh Gorge, up in the Lehigh Gorge area. Also potentially the 125th park, but long term, looking at how do we close those trail gaps, bringing trails closer to communities, because they're not only places for foot traffic, but they also can be transportation routes.
Absolutely. Yep.
Making our trails accessible.
That's right. As someone who literally, when I literally use the Cumberland Valley Rail Trail to get to my office on campus, that is my commuter corridor. And I remember when it didn't exist between my office and me, and it was a pain, but it's certainly much less comfortable to be able to bike to it. So build it and they will come certainly holds true for trails.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I just want to, if anybody has any questions, we have a few more minutes here. Please remember to put them into the chat, and we'll make sure that we get them. Alan, you mentioned that your favorite rail trail. We end up on rail trails a lot because not only are they transportation routes, not only are they places that allow a variety of different activity, they are creative reuse of brownfields or areas that were formerly industrial sites. So.
Well, and communities were built around that. I mean, that's the whole point, is that they connect urban, suburban, and rural, because communities, we look in Shippensburg, where I'm from, literally the creation of the railroad in the 1830s shifted the center of town almost a mile to where the railroad was, right? So they are fundamental, and sort of reconnecting with them and reimagining them becomes something that Pennsylvania that no one else can.
Yeah. I mean, I where I live, we were in Harrisburg the other day, and we're like, we wish that bridge would open up for walkers, so that
the Cumberland Valley Railroad Bridge, right?
yeah, that's exactly the one.
Marcy, I could get on my bike and ride right to your office, if along the Cumberland Valley route. We just have to keep piecing it together.
Yep, let's keep doing that. I will say I added into the chat recently in our most recent newsletter. Matt Crosby from the Bureau of Forestry did a nice overview of the state forest hiking trails. These are the long distance trails within state forests. So talks a little bit about a few of the trails that you mentioned, but there's that long distance perspective, and then there's the shorter hiking trails, your rails to trails, and then your community trailways and your greenways. So a lot of different ways to think about trails.
And so, speaking of which, and doing an ask here, Marcy, is there anything that we can do to support the foundation's effort to advocate for the funding that you were talking about in the budget? Is there a link? Is there a letter? What can we do to support that?
There'll be a letter going up on our webpage very soon. We have a Take Action Center, and we encourage you to call your state house and senator and let them know that you support investing in the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, and that you support the extra $5 million that can be used for, as I said, this year, Glenanoco and Laurel Caverns, but annually to close those trail gaps. So keep an eye on our webpage. Our letter is going out to legislators this week, and then we'll have a Take Action page up very soon. And it's as easy as putting your address in case you don't know who your elected officials are. You can just put your address in, and it'll tell you who they are. So it's a great tool.
Fantastic.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
Okay. Up there she go. Be a voice. It was just put up there in the chat box, so you can take a peek there. I have the day off from my state park job and had a chance to listen. Thank you. Well, thank you for being here, Teresa.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Well, and I'll say as we're wrapping up, I want to wish everyone a happy Juneteenth tomorrow. I hope you get to get out and celebrate and think about all the blessings that we have in the world right now, and maybe you'll get out and celebrate on a trail.
Excellent. And as somebody put in, I believe it was Martha, and what's good reminder is that there's also water trails. We didn't mention them, but we have a network of water trails in Pennsylvania as well. And on the Conservation Heritage Project, there's a history of the first water trail, which is the Susquehanna River middle section.
Well, I beg your pardon. I did. You may recall I mentioned getting out on the water at Warriors Path on Monday. So I will be out on a water trail myself in a couple of days. Yeah,
just please make sure you check the water gauge before you go, because we're expecting some more heavy rain.
Well, I was anticipating going out, and I didn't for exactly that reason. So.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next month on the 16th.
Yeah.
Bye.
And maybe before then we'll see you out on the trail.
Perhaps that would be great. Bye-bye.